Hey,
Doing real good. How about you?
I'm doing all right. Doing all right. We have a topical topic today, especially for the guy in the northeastern corner of this chat right now.
Mr.
So,
Reboot himself,
stationed
right?
in Florida, yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about, it is topical, and we have, and this time of year is the time that you definitely should have things in place when it comes to disaster recovery, disaster planning, preparedness, checklists, all that stuff. Before we go any further, I am Brian Bracci. I am with BNL. Whoops, I did that backwards. BNL PC Solutions out of Long Island, New York. I'm joined by.
Brandon Bowers with Eisner Amper Managed Technology Services out of sunny South Florida. Not sunny today,
Sunny
but
today. Yeah.
And I am Groot with Windstar in Culpeper, Virginia.
Very well. All right. So we may have touched on this subject at some point in the past, but I think it's important and more so, like I said, this time of year to kind of talk about the things that you should be doing uh, to get away from the reactiveness of disasters, because that's what the majority of people do in their personal lives. But on the business side, there's definitely some things that you can do to prepare you how to act, what to do, who does what in the event of a disaster. And this hurricane down in Florida, I mean, I think the one plus to something like this is that we all just kind of came out of COVID, and we had that whether you're still in a hybrid work environment now, we had most people working remotely, so it's along the same concept as that. But even when we did that, I don't think the nation was prepared for COVID, and I think we learned a lot from that. And there should be some takeaways that we can use and put that into what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, I agree.
Um, so let's just if you want to spitball it. I mean, when you're talking about disaster planning, I mean, aside from the get your food, your water, your gas, your safe shelter, or, the safety aspect of it, is comes first. On the business side, I think some of the things that we should talk about are what should the business have in place today before something happens. What's one of the
I,
things that you guys think?
I think number one is having a sit down and putting together, even if it's the most basic thing, you have a one-page Word document, but call that your disaster recovery plan and start getting together like, what are we going to do in the event of an incident, in the event of a disaster? What are the things we need to know? Who do we need to communicate with? That list will grow
Yeah.
well
Mhm.
beyond one page once you put together a full plan. But having something in place so that when you're in the instance of having an incident, whether that's a hurricane like we're having here in Florida, or you've got a data breach or ransomware or whatever else it is, it's a stressful situation for people to be in. And when you're in a stressful situation, you make bad decisions most typically, right? So whatever you can do to plan that out beforehand, so like you don't need to make this, like your decision tree is in the document, it's your checklist. Go through your checklist and just make sure that it gets done and you know who to contact in there. That's usually what my number one recommendation is. Then what's in there, there's a lot of different things that, we may talk about some of those right now, but I think just starting with something basic there and saying, hey, this is our version one disaster recovery plan and what we're going to work off of. That's
And I think
So
there's
yeah, we
two pieces to that.
like a must.
One piece is similar to COVID. The office is up and running. Nobody's going there though. So let's all look at that remote workforce side of it. The second part of it is, especially during a tornado, hurricane, flooding, the building goes down, loses power for a week. That's your real, and that's something that should be tested at least once a year. But this is, I mean, I think Brandon, in Florida now, I mean, there's the high likelihood that some of these businesses are going to be without power. What's the plan there? What do you do? How do you work? I mean, even not only your office, what about your home? What's the steps to recovery from that, or steps to mitigate any obstacles that you're going to have? I mean, is that written down?
Well,
That's a
well, that
key part of it.
yeah, that's a good point. So specifically, when we're talking about a hurricane, there's some steps beforehand you want to make, right? General preparation. So again, it's timely. I'm going to use the hurricane example right now.
Sure.
So some things there, hey, maybe everybody should take their laptops home, or if you've got monitors or equipment next to where you're physically located in Florida, where the hurricane is, you want to take those away from the window or bag them up or get things off the floor, because after the instance of it happening, what's going to happen? Usually, windows get busted in, there's leaks in the ceilings. So anything you can do in preparation to either prevent the problem from happening, or at least preventing further issues afterwards. Everybody's going to be without power, at some instance. If you're here in South Florida, like, we're all going to get impacted by one of those big hurricanes at some point. And that should be one of the items you should focus on, but also even some of the more simpler things, like, again, a window getting blown out, and how are we going to handle a situation like that? How do we
Yeah,
plan
our
for that?
clients, we have flood detection in their server rooms. We have devices in there that'll detect, water leakage. In the instance of something like this, there's nothing you can do, right? If you're flooded from a hurricane, if a window breaks, water gets in and it starts, gets into that server room, IT room, whatever, and that equipment's gone. You could say, so that's the extreme, but the reality is, we use flood detection for, the kitchen room's backed up to the kitchen sink and there's a leak there. Let's go there and shut the equipment down, whatever we have to do. In this case, if you get that alert during a flood, you have to have a completely do a 180 on how the business is going to operate. Are you prepared to do cloud virtualization? Like, is that stuff in place to keep the business going?
This all should be starting very much like a cybersecurity world. It starts with an assessment, right? I have to assess what my business is going to need to be able to conduct business in the event of a disaster. That being said, what are the systems that are required for us to do that business? Once we know those things, we can then build a checklist of things that we need to do around those systems, so that if they disappear, we can, have a thing of what we're supposed to do. Where's the break glass document that has all the contact information? Who's responsible for what piece of information? Who does what? What executive's in charge of this? If the building burns down to the ground, what does that mean? Versus, okay, are we virtualizing in the cloud? It's no different than any other thing we're sitting here preaching every week.
Mm-hmm.
This goes back to having that DR plan in place, and it's something you need to do before the disaster
That's right.
strikes. Yeah.
Right.
And simple things that should be in there. You made a good point, because I've seen this happen where no one has employee contact numbers, cell phone
Correct. Because
numbers.
it's all in Exchange server or something, right? Like,
Except
you're cooked.
exactly. So simple things like that. You need a call tree in that plan. Can't get into the office. Okay, what's going to be the plan to work? How are our backups functioning? Did we do an offsite before, the hurricane hits? Do we need to shut down any equipment? Like, that should all be part of that plan.
Right. In the assessment, we're looking at, like, okay, obviously we're talking about backups for a lot of these things, but what's the recovery time objective versus point? And then what's the maximum tolerable outage? Like if we're talking about physical disaster, then we could be weeks before we're back in the building, months, right? So what are we doing about that?
And I don't think that that's far from reality during a disaster. It's
no,
and that's with some of the solutions out there. We're able to included with our business continuity solution, provide 30 days of uptime in the cloud. And then if we go beyond that, it's billable at that point. But we can include 30 days of uptime in the cloud where your business left off, and just resume as close to normal business functions as you can.
And I think the important part of what you guys are trying to convey, and I'm sorry to interject, Brian, but I just came out of a meeting and I was trying to emphasize this to these folks as well, is it's one thing to have that plan, and you got to have that, right? But then you have to be testing it, and then you have to have systems that allow you to verify. Like, okay, I'm relying on backups. Well, then that means I need to know my backups are good, right? So do I have a system in place that's checking that, and I'm sure my backups are going to work? I'm sure I can go to the cloud. You know, again, I know we get stuck on compliance and all that, but the reality is with compliance, you need to validate, you need to prove. And so that's for the regulatory requirement, but for the peace of mind requirement, right? If you're a business owner or an executive and you're in charge of this and you're preparing for that disaster, it's all the same stuff. I mean, you care about all those things regardless of whether there's regulatory pressure for it or not.
Agreed. I mean, we have clients we have to twice a year test we shut their building down. We kill power to the IT room and
Go home.
go ahead and
You're
work.
done, yeah.
We are on, Sev 1, buildings decommissioned, go ahead and work. And they get a checklist of stuff that they have to do. Log in this way. Were you able to see your most recent data? Send an email outside the company to so-and-so, attaching a document from today. So it's a whole, and that gets done twice a year, signed off on. So
That's
we know
fantastic.
it's auditable, it's tested and verified. So we're, for the most part, that they're in a good place. They're ready for
See,
something.
those
like
people are prepared, at least for their data.
Mhm.
And then they got to go through the rest, right? Making sure they know who to contact. And I'm sure you're doing all that,
Yep,
but I'm just
yep,
saying,
that's
like,
all part of it.
because they're
It kinda
walking
ties
through
in
that exercise.
with the incident response plan too, because there's a lot
Absolutely.
of step over in there. So yeah.
Overlap, right?
Yep.
I mean, big time. Look, disaster recovery is, when we talk cybersecurity, we're always thinking the hacker, the computer, right? But it's more than that. It's the incident response. It's the entire recovery, because not only do we have to deal with the event if there's a breach, but sometime we're going to need to remediate that event. Then we're going to need to restore and then debrief. And all of the things we're sitting here talking about in terms of disaster recovery kind of come into play with that.
One thing I didn't think of that I read before is if you're still a paper business, the majority of your work is conducted and you're filling out forms and you're doing stuff physical, and that stuff is in the office, and something happens like this, and that's gone. Should you have scanned? Should you have done things differently? Evaluate your routines.
Yeah,
Because if that's gone, you're out of luck.
Yeah, and that's oftentimes the backup systems. Like I know
Right.
in our medical practices, right? Like if their systems go down, they try and if we have planned maintenance, they'll print ahead of time the schedule the
Right.
next day and all that. But they still can fall back to paper if they need to, because the systems are down. But then you got to get all that information back into the system once it comes back up.
You do.
Worst case, you need to have insurance in place too. I mean, same goes for like a cyber event, but make sure, hey, you're in Florida, get hurricane insurance, have flood insurance,
Right.
things of that nature. Because I remember, oh man, it's going back. Maybe it's been 6 years since the last big hurricane down here. I think.
Hmm.
We had one customer that had damaged the roof of their building. Comcast internet was out in the area. One of the wireless towers was also out, so we couldn't even get LTE service in the
Right.
area to bring them up. Luckily, they were on a cloud solution for everything, so they could work remotely. But there was still major business interruption, and insurance really, helped big with that. When it came to any of the additional work that either we had to do and get them back
Hmm.
up and running, or even some of the providers that they needed to leverage to repair building, repair their office, fix the
Does
flooring, all kinds of
insurance,
stuff like that.
do they pay anything like, you know, salary? Like you're paying people their salary, but they can't work, right? Will insurance cover any of that?
I'm not sure, but any of the services I know that we had to work overtime to do, insurance covered all of that for any of the customers that we worked with. I'm not
Cool.
sure about, lost usage time, right, from your employees not being able to function.
Right. That might be a little more long term.
Yeah.
And something to consider too is if you're dealing with whether you're working, your business is national or even international, and I hate to say it, but they don't want to be impacted by this. As sympathetic as they are to your situation, they're on the West Coast, they're in another country. They just need their product or their whatever. So you got to think of how, and when you're planning out how it's going to impact the company beyond your local, landscape.
Like your clients, if they're outside of the area, you're the one being
Exactly.
impacted, but they're not. So
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah,
If something happens to my building and my clients don't care, they need support, they need services, they didn't, so our plan
They don't
is
they don't care as long as you answer the phone when the help desk call comes in.
exactly,
That's when
exactly. And then
they
that's,
yeah.
that's got to go on your list too, is your phones, right? Are
yeah.
you in an old, PBX or hybrid PBX system that has no VoIP capability and well, then you're shit out of luck. I hate to say it because, you
No,
know, that's why we push in these services that are semi-seamless to being in the office and being able to pick up that phone, dial out from the office, transfer, keep the business afloat as best you can, and that should be
yeah,
tested as well too.
sure.
Um,
No.
what else we have? Let's see.
I'll look at my checklist here.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on a lot of the broad
Yeah,
overview
so
of.
I can read off like kind of what I got on my
Sure.
list a little bit if that helps. Like, we say like create an IT asset inventory list to identify all the functions, the data, the hardware, and systems in the business, right? Then identify what potential disasters or threats could happen to those systems. Then for each one of those systems that's mission critical, how can we minimize or avoid any of that happening, right? Or minimize it at the very least. Um, we want to go have plans for recovery specific to tornadoes, specific to hurricanes, or nuclear attack or whatever, right? It's not always the same. Same with incident response. When we do tabletop exercises, we do ransomware, we do, it's different
Sure.
things
Yeah.
cause different ways. Then get your plan and your timeline for each of those functions and then prioritize so that when that's happening, you're doing it at, get this first, so we're doing it in the right order, wasting as little time as possible. Make sure that backup strategy is there and test it, validate it, right? Define your communications plan with employees, clients, vendors, and the media.
Mm-hmm.
Create a break glass document that has all the instructions on what to do in case your key executive dies or something along those lines happens to the company, right? Like, look, if you're the key player in your company, Brian, and you pass away tomorrow, what is your company doing? That's a disaster, right?
To
Like, I'm
add to
sorry.
that for a second,
Yeah,
and to
please.
what I mentioned before about the communication. So, like this document, it needs to be available during the
Well,
disaster.
that's exactly.
So
That's
make
right.
sure it's not on
That's why
only a
it's break
system
glass.
in the office. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
No, it's got to be hanging or in a sealed envelope, under the desk or something. I don't know, but yeah, it's got to be
in a
physical.
safe in the
Yep.
in somebody's house
That's
or
got a
bank or
regular
whatever.
lock, no electric
Yep.
locks.
Yep.
Right? It's got to be a tumbler or whatever.
Right.
Then obviously if you have a recover a disaster team, make sure everybody knows what their roles are, get your communication to the media, get that strategy worked out and make a policy on it. And then the last thing I got on my list is periodically meet and review and
Yep.
up.
This isn't one and done. This is organic.
Right.
It's and to Brandon's point on what he said earlier, we had we were doing a tabletop with a client, and it came up that the internet there was no internet service, and on top of that, the cell towers were all destroyed locally to your residence, and you had so your backup plan was, I'm going to do everything through LTE. We got everybody LTE service books, and they're all able to work remote. Now LTE is gone, so they actually ended up purchasing not for data but for communication, GPS.
I was going to say like
phone.
a satellite phone.
Yeah, satellite phone. So now they can use that to at least communicate. And I said, well, that's listen, it's one thing that they didn't think of, and maybe because you're impacted by this, but now you can at least call outside of your area and listen. The end game here is to we have to look at the impact and the severity.
Correct.
If we're talking nuclear, God forbid, I mean, then who gives a shit, right? I mean, it's
and if we're talking about the hit is not that impactful, right? Like, I mean, if it means that, I don't know, the flowers don't get packed tomorrow, that's not
Right.
as imperative as the people don't get water, Like, you know,
Yeah,
like
I mean, look at FedEx. FedEx reaches
certain
out 2 days ago, 3 days ago. Here's our impact on what we
Right.
see, what we're observing. That communication is key too, and that should be on your list too. If it's something that like a storm that you can see, it still gets on this list. But listen, communicate with your suppliers, your vendors, your clients. Listen, here's our
ask them what their
process.
plans are, right? Know what
Exactly.
the vendors' plans are. Know, you know,
Right.
yeah, how can I communicate that to my clients ahead
Which I
of time?
didn't think
This
of
is
that.
what
That's
you can
something
expect. These are the
that should
things
be
that
on
could
there.
potentially happen, and here's how we handled them. You know,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Yeah, I
Yep.
think that's a great idea.
Yep.
I'm on
And
that.
see, we just spitballed that one. That
It's
just
going to
came
my
out of
list.
the-
I'm adding it right now.
Yep. And you learn, like I said, it's evolving. You're going to add to it. You're going to change things. You're going to change people and processes, but it needs to be done. I mean, you can see why and how many you can get real granular with this stuff, and you need to at some level, but high level for your employees, break it down, make sure they have a copy of it with them, and you know, it's never until they need it that they need it, right?
I
And
would
don't
say
get overwhelmed in the beginning, though. Just get
that's what I
something
was just going to say.
down.
Brian, you're right. It is granular and it is big, but here's the deal. Start one,
Yeah.
right? Do 5 things, whatever. It's not going to be right or perfect or done all the way or whatever, but get something.
Mhm.
Don't make it overwhelming. Don't put that mountain in front of you. And then regularly review it with your team, because they're going to see things that are important to them that you never even considered. Like, what's important to me and what's important to my team are 2 different worlds completely, right? Like, they just don't care what's going on over here for me. They got phones to answer. You know, that's what's important to them.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so, yeah, review it. Don't get intimidated. Don't let this be something that, oh my God, it's yet another thing. These guys are always just talking about these. Who's got time for this? Well,
Right.
Look, you don't have time when hurricane's knocking over your building.
Well, that's the takeaway. I think, like you said, start something. Don't be that reactive, because you're going to fail. Guarantee you're going to fail,
Right.
because you're going to look for shortcuts or try to do things that either aren't in compliance with your business, or
Right.
oh, you know what, shut this off. We don't need that. Or give this guy access. You don't want to, you know, compromise your business practices because you don't have something in place.
And what did I say
No.
earlier? You're going to make bad decisions
Yep.
when you're under the gun like that.
Yep. Exactly.
Well, listen, not to get off on a side tangent, but look, the reality is executives who are, strong executives, generally, my experience is I've been, watching their behavior because I'm trying to be a good executive. Got a long ways to go, but I'm seeing that what they're really strong at is having the information given to them by the people who are in the trenches and making a quick decision, knowing they can trust that information, right? So what's the disaster recovery plan? This is the tool that your team needs to have to be able to then provide you with the up-to-minute information that's going to be necessary during this crisis for you to be able to make decisions in an effective and good way for both your clients, your team, and your business.
Yep, agreed. And that's having the right people in the right places, because that's you have confidence in everyone's role for
Correct.
In their job and in their place on your checklist here.
And they know what the role is, right?
Exactly.
Well, they know that if you're not there, it doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Like that's then you got it.
Yeah.
Your disaster recovery is ready when you don't need to show up.
Agreed.
All right. I know you want to wrap it up, so.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's pretty much. I think we touched on all the key elements here, and just want everyone to obviously down in Florida, Brandon, be safe, you and your family, and your clients, and everyone else. I got family, friends
Having a
down there.
hurricane party tonight, man. Come on.
There you go. I'm
Well,
sure you have a
we're getting
checklist
the
for that, right?
rain from you. I think we're going to get your rain a couple of days from now, but they say the
Probably.
wind will be gone. But it's coming in like 140 miles an hour. Or
Oh yeah, it's up there.
It's pretty
yeah.
big.
Yeah.
It's crazy stuff.
All right, everybody, be safe.
Good luck.
And,
Be safe.
Good luck. We'll catch up with you next week.